Astrology signs paired with indie albums, part 1. Once again, we're starting the list off with Aries. You guys are the leader. You guys are motivated. Most of the time, you guys are confident. So for this, I thought Modest Mouse's This Is a Long Drive for Someone with Nothing to Think About. That album was going to be my number one pick just because this was really sort of them stepping out of their comfort zone and doing something new. For number 2, we're talking about Tauruses. You guys are practical, stoic, and stubborn. This album is going to be Interpol, Turn on the Bright Lights. This one should be pretty self-explanatory. This album is very stoic and dark, but at the same time, it's very practical and taking on new themes while still sort of sticking to their overall sound. And finally, we're talking about Geminis. You guys are outgoing, you're adaptable, you're a little bit impulsive at times, so for this, I thought Peter Bjorn and John's Writer's Block would be the best choice. If you haven't listened to this album, you definitely need to. You most certainly have heard young folks off of it, but it's also probably one of the best indie albums of all time, according to me. So, yeah, stay tuned for part 2. Thank you, guys. Astrological signs paired to indie albums, part 2. First up here are Cancers. You guys are loving, you're the caretaker, you can be sensitive, and also you have a pretty good sense of humor. So I thought Edward Sharpe and the Magnetic Zeros, a self-titled album, would be a good choice. It's just one of those albums you can throw on during a beautiful day to remind you how lucky you are to be alive, much like being around someone who's a Cancer. Second up is Leos. They're passionate, creative. They can also be stubborn and a little bit self-centered at times, but don't take that to heart. So for this, I thought Arcade Fire's Funeral would be the perfect choice. This being Arcade Fire's first studio album, they really discovered their trademark sound and stuck to it. This might actually be my favorite Arcade Fire album here. It's short and concise, at times experimental, but definitely the most Arcade Fire album you can listen to. And finally is Virgo. You guys are reliable, you're thoughtful. At times you can be overthinking and a little bit uptight. So I thought Radiohead's Kid A would be quite fitting. Kid A is definitely one of those go-to rainy day listens. And the trademark end of the world sound in this album is also the epitome of this. Indie albums paired to Astrological signs, part 3. Alright, this time we're talking about Libras. You guys are fair, you're diplomatic, you guys are really just sort of the scale of everything. You guys are also clever. So for this, I thought A Lot of Sea Lice by Kurt Vile and Courtney Barnett would probably be the best choices, being that it's a split album, and it's also pretty much like the perfect marriage between the two artists, I think. Second up is Scorpios. We are determined, ambitious. We're also pretty brave. So for this, I thought In the Aeroplane Over the Sea by Neutral Milk Hotel would be the number one pick. This has to be one of the most ambitious albums I've ever come across, carrying a strong narrative throughout, and even writing in a style that caters to the narrative makes it that much stronger. Alright, and finally, this time is Sagittarius. You guys are free-spirited, funny, smart, and so for this, I thought Oracular Spectacular by MGMT would be fitting. Probably the most free-spirited an album can be next to an Edward Sharpe project. This album also has funny moments, believe it or not. Astrological signs paired with indie albums, part 4. If there are any genres you want to see me cover next, let me know in the comments, and I'd be happy to do that. First up here is Capricorns. You guys are persistent, practical, and adaptable. This was kind of a difficult conclusion to come to, but my choice is going to be Twin Fantasy by Car Seat Headrest. Toledo's really has a history of pushing boundaries, and he's not a stranger to rolling up his sleeves and getting all the work done himself. His overall sound is adapted to his rise in popularity, and I think that's really clear in this album. Second up is Aquarius. You guys are the token wild card who goes against the grain. Needless to say, you're unpredictable. You guys are going to be handed off to 22 A Million by Bon Iver. Vernon really sort of pulled this one out of left field, having solidified his spot in the indie folk genre and then flipping it on its head by releasing this album. And third is Pisces. You guys are closed off, creative, and overly emotional sometimes, but that's all right. This is probably my favorite album from this artist. It's going to be Carrie and Lowell by Sufjan Stevens. I don't think you can get much more creative and emotional than this album, and I'd say that about pretty much any of his releases, but this is a great